Okay, good morning. It is 8 o'clock. Welcome to the last grand rounds of the season of the 22-23 academic year. So this is more of a business item than anything else. It is a requirement, as we all know. So before we start, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that we are located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to enrich our vibrant community, particularly this month of Indigenous History Month. And of course, on Wednesday was the official day recognizing Indigenous peoples, cultures, and so on. So welcome, everybody. As I say, this is our last rounds, and we thought we would save it for a new process, the new faculty annual report. We do have individuals from other departments, I think, joining us as well. So I'd like to welcome them. And, just to emphasize, as you listen to this, one of the things that's really important, in general, particularly in your careers as a whole, but in academic careers, is reflection, right? Taking a bit of time to think about, where you've been and where you'd like to go. And so if you think about the annual report as an opportunity to do that, and then from personal and departmental perspective, an opportunity to celebrate all of your accomplishments for the year. So, just be really rigorous in terms of identifying all the things that you've done, and that way we can celebrate those. And obviously we have individuals and institutions that we have to report to, so we get an opportunity to do that. So on behalf of the department, I'd like to sincerely thank Vijay. He has put so much time and effort into this, and so it only made sense that he should lead this. And for those who don't know, Vijay, of course, is our Associate Chair Education and Faculty Development. He has worked tirelessly to support his colleagues, from new faculty orientations to faculty development sessions to reviewing tenure and promotion materials, and really is a mentor's mentor. So in terms of the university FAR system, he's been supporting and helping the faculty with regards to the technical development. And so today he's going to tell us about the new system, and really from the small F faculty's perspective. So what you should expect, and some tips and tricks and so on. And then we'll hopefully have lots of time for questions. So Vijay couldn't be here in the Clinical Sciences building, but there are a handful of us, more than a handful of us here. And so I'll hand it over to Vijay.
Thanks, Darman. Yeah, my wife unfortunately is out of town. And so Zoom does definitely afford some privileges, and this would be one of those. I could get the kids to school and still be here on time. So here are objectives for today. To be completely honest, I was asked to give 2 to 3 objectives. I like the number 3, so here's 3 objectives. But honestly, we're going to spend most of our time on number 1, with just a little bit on 2 and one last slide on 3. And then Narman actually might fill in more about objective 3 that's here. So we're really going to spend most of our time talking about the changes to the system. So we all love change, right? Obviously, change is very difficult. And having been here long enough, I've been through many changes. I was lucky to already start in Bruce Fisher's first annual report. I didn't have to move from paper to online, but many of you had to, then to move to a new one, and then now to a university-wide one. And we know that this change is definitely difficult, but part of what my goal through this entire process of helping out is to try and streamline things. Of course, the big question is, why are we doing this? We know change is hard. It's yet another thing we're adding to our plate. And this framework I'm about to show you, I actually picked up from Jonathan Choi when he was doing his MBA, and it's always stuck with me. So in any organization, in terms of productivity, you look at 3 kind of pillars: quality, time, and cost. You can never have all 3. And what I mean by that is, if you want to keep costs low, you have to choose quality, time, whether it's going to be high quality, but it's going to take a long time, or it's going to be fast, and it's going to be low quality. If you have all the money in the world, sure, you can get the quality and time you want. On the flip side, if you're going to need things fast, you either have to pay for it to keep it high quality or low cost, then you have low quality. So it's always a bit of a balance. And I'm going to come back to this framework as we talk today. Now, I may be partly guilty for this change because I'll be honest, I spoke quite frankly at faculty council when we were voting on this. And the analogy I used was, are we going to continue with a bespoke suit that is tailored, perfectly cut to one's body? Or are we going to take an off-the-rack suit and tailor it? Is the analogy I used. The fact of the matter is, our university has been gouged lots of money that had to come down to the departmental levels, or the faculty levels, I should say, and MedIT got demolished. Like, that's just the reality. We don't like it, but it's the truth. And so we were left with a decision with having less money. Do we go with a centralized service? And to me, I think it was fairly straightforward. We had to, because we just didn't have the human resource to keep MyFMD going. So that's where we entered this transition. But my goal through all of this was to try and make it as streamlined as possible. And being an internal optimist, I think we've done a pretty good job. So this is what your previous MyFOMD looked like. You can see all the things on the side. And this is what FAR is going to look like. You can see it's actually fairly similarly laid out, maybe not in the exact same order. FAR being a centralized thing, they have a certain way that they've built it. And for whatever reason, funding is separate than research, unlike our previous system. But honestly, it's very similar. And my experience with FAR is most of it is intuitive. Not 100%. That's part of what we're going to be talking about. So one of the things to keep in mind when you're in a centralized system and you're dealing with IST on campus is you're engaging in discussions. And sometimes what we talk about in change management is what we call min specs, whatever minimum specifications. And these are the things what we call is our must build, that number one, things our faculty need that does not exist in FAR. And again, I don't want to come across as taking too much credit here. Manjula Garashankar and even Maya Lang before that did a lot of this legwork. I was just really involved in the last 6 months, kind of trying to see what we conceptualized to fruition. But there were things that the FAR team were willing to build for us. So there are things that exist in FAR that did not exist before. IST has done a lot of great work here. On the flip side, there's certain things that just cannot be changed. If there is a hardwired section that every other faculty uses, you can't change that section unless you were to clone it and then make changes. And that comes at a bit of a cost because then IST is dealing with multiple versions. And they only want to do that if it's absolutely necessary. But what we can do, number three, is tailor. Within a section, you can hide certain things. In other faculties, they're okay to find out if your publication is submitted or under review. We just wanted to know, has it been published? So that was something we were able to hide. So just keep in mind that there were these three categories, and Manjula and Maya and I advocated very strongly for the must builds and the tailors, but we had to stop when it was just something we were told we could not change. One of the other things to keep in mind is it's a race against time. Manjula and I really, with Chris Benson from MedIT, pushed really hard to get our system ready for April for the sandbox, and it didn't happen. It was really much a race against time, and the big problem was we were dealing with a centralized service where we couldn't add more cost, but we also didn't want to sacrifice quality. And so instead of rushing something to be in production in April that wasn't quite what we wanted, we chose to honestly have the sandbox only ready a couple of weeks ago for it to launch live July 1st. Is it ideal? No, but this was actually an intentional decision to get the report as close to what we wanted. Now, did we get there? No. I'm going to be first to admit we didn't get all the changes we wanted, but I'm a glass half full kind of person, and we got 80 to 90% of the way there. There's a few little things that bother me that we're going to have to explain how you use this section. We'll get to it next year. So just realize that. What you won't see is how much it was not there 3 months ago, how much the team has really worked to tailor the system to help us. So there will be complaints, there will be grumblings, but many of you will have no clue how I don't want to say how bad it was, but how different it was even just 3 months ago, even a month ago. So I do want to give kudos to IST, who's done a lot of work here. So now I'm going to go through a demo. I do have the actual system in the sandbox available to screen share, but to keep it simple, I just took screenshots. I'm going to go pretty quick over the first few slides because we'll have this available as a handout, this PowerPoint. And honestly, you're not going to remember it even 7 days from now. And we also have built a FAR user manual, and I've just finished a video that's going to cover this first section, but I still want to show it to everybody. So when you log into FAR, this is your landing page. And what you're going to notice is this part may not be completely clear what you do from here. Obviously, the Take Me There button seems to scream. But one of the things to keep in mind is when FAR was first introduced, IST built a FAR user documentation. I find this section is helpful just for navigating, but it's not as helpful to tell you what goes where. So think of this FAR user documentation as the technical side. And then what Manjula and I have worked on, and we're like 95% done, and we'll be finishing it next week, our FOMD FAR manual will be the thing that tells you, please put this here. So this is, again, IST's FAR kind of guide. It's more technical, understanding the process, understanding how to do certain things. I'm going to just go through the high level stuff everybody needs to know kind of on day one. So we really want every faculty member in the FOMD to have an ORC ID. So if you don't have one already, go to orcid.org and get one. And once you've done that, keep that up to date because this is the primary thing that FAR pulls from. Now, to set up your ORC ID, this is the part that's not intuitive. I never would have thought to click on my CCID here and then click my profile, but that's where you can then enter your ORC ID. And again, you don't have to memorize this. It'll be in the manual. It'll be in a video. Now, one of the other things that to me is weird is I hit save and now I'm like, where do I go? How do I get back? Well, you click on this My Reports and click Home. So that's the kind of stuff that maybe isn't as obvious. Once you're here, you click Take Me There and you're in the report. So I know I went through that quickly in 2 minutes, but it'll be all in the manual. And there's I tried to keep it to 5-minute video just to show this part. So on this screen, there's a few things that I want to go through. The first is, again, something that doesn't look like a button you can click, but this is actually a button, these 3 little people. And this is where you would actually delegate a secondary report writer. And so this is where you would add someone. And if you watch the video, my joke is Manjula still won't do my annual report despite buying her coffee. But this is where you would add someone. There's some rules around who you can add. We're running into issues with IST where you can't add generic CCIDs. So you need to know the admin's actual CCID, like their name CCID. But one of the key things that we're messaging across both the department and the faculty is, although FAR allows delegates, it's actually a human resource issue at the level of the division and the department to decide whether there's support. Again, everybody was trimmed back with all the cuts. So each division is going to have a discussion centrally with Francois and Rayanne in terms of what support is there. I will just state, my wife being a prof in the Faculty of Education, the vast majority of faculty do their own FAR. That's just what it is. I know we're a bit unique in the FOMD, but I'm not going to weigh into what your division and the department has on resources. That's a discussion. So that's where you would add it. So then when you click back to the My Reports and Home, we're going to go back into the actual report. So starting with the executive summary, you just click on something, you click executive summary. This was our previous highlight section. And so you would enter in here the same sort of thing that you would have in the highlight section. And it says it right there, describe major accomplishments and challenges for the reporting period. This is a very important section. I can't tell you enough, sitting at FEC, this is where we go to get your high-level view of what you think your year was like in the previous highlight section, as well as here. FAR is interesting, I think, in a good way compared to previous MIFOMD, because it has less sections that are mandatory to be filled in which is good in the sense you won't get some of the odd errors you may have had where you're like, I don't understand what's missing. But the downside is, I think you only need the executive summary and like one thing in teaching, one thing in research, and you can submit it. So it's on you to actually go through everything to actually fill in the proper fields. The other thing I'll draw your attention to is, although you can just click through on the side, an actual simpler thing might be just to click through the buttons down here to next, and this will take you right through each section. So the next section is personal information. This one, we believe you're going to have to fill in. Again, it's just the first time and they'll be carried forward. I know this causes some grief for people because they're like, oh, I don't know what day. If you scroll down, you have to also state what date you got your current rank. The problem is the different systems aren't talking to each other, so we don't have a good way of importing this information accurately. Then next is your workload and job description. And this is part of the thing where literally we're down to the 11th hour. We're still not sure if this is going to be uploaded or if you're going to have to fill it in. There's literally high-level discussions between our faculty leadership and IST as to what's happening. My recommendation is if you show up to FAR and it's not populated, what I'm doing is just copying over kind of the same thing that was in your My FOMD job description, with one little caveat that I'll explain a bit later around administration. But you can see here, my clinical workplace teaching was 30%. I put that there. The other clinical was 10, general teaching up here, research there, admin there. You can still access my FOMD. You can still look at last year's annual report. That is all still available. But again, even though we're 7-8 days out, it's possible the team might be able to upload this. Next, you've got clinical workplace teaching. And to me, this is a win. One of the things you'll notice is here is just a checkbox. Was it PGME? Was it undergrad? Was it both? And we tried to keep it simple to these two. People might complain there should be more categories, but what's gone is that extra learner tab. We heard very loud and clear. People were quite frustrated because they fill this out and they not know why it can't submit because there was a secondary tab for learners that you'd have to go in and add your learners separately. That's one big plus here is everything streamlined, so it's just on one section. Now, I'm not going through every single thing in the sidebar. For those who teach in courses that are in Bear Tracks and PeopleSauce that have the previously USRIs, that's what this undergrad graduate class is taught is. That part, the teaching of the course gets auto-imported, but we're going to talk about teaching evals coming up. Clinical workplace teaching, which will apply to a lot of us, I've shown you. Now, general teaching. Essentially, general teaching was just copied over from our previous general teaching. So again, everything should look fairly similar. And I'll talk about some minor things about what is teaching versus what is scholarship coming up. So I am skipping over the grad student section. But what I will say is, to me, this drove me crazy why we needed grad student supervision thesis based, grad student supervision course based. How could that not just be a toggle within one section? That's apparently hardwired into FAR. They built it that way. That's one thing that we just had to go, okay, fine. It doesn't make sense, but we'll leave it. So if you just keep scrolling down and clicking next, if you have a grad student that you're actively supervising in a thesis, fill it in. If you don't, you keep clicking next. This stuff we don't think is going to be imported. You're just going to enter your current students now. I'm going to drop down to the mentorship section to say a couple of things. First, I'm going to draw your attention down here to this create another. A lot of the sections will have this. So you filled it in. If you toggle on the create another and hit save, it saves it and then opens another one for you and you can fill it in. So it's a quick way to put a lot of things in one section. Not all the sections have it, but most of them do. But what I want to draw your attention to the mentorship section specifically is it is really mentoring learners on a variety of things. And there's some pull down things in terms of what it could be, but you don't use it for the, thesis supervision, course-based supervision, peer review of teaching. Mentorship of colleagues goes under the service section. Mentorship of learners, not directly related to a course, that's what goes here. All right, now we're into the research section. And so this was one when I logged in, it happened to find this paper just automatically. And you'll notice there's this flag here because as with our old system, The problem with import is it's nice because it gets most of it there, but it may not have all the information. If you click that details, you can find what's missing and you can enter it. And then if you click this search external data sources, there's some options there in terms of the import that they're still building as we speak, but OrcID is the best one. I'm now going to talk about other research activities. You can see on the sidebar, that was journal papers I talked about. Book chapters and books are fairly self-explanatory. Creative works and performances are more for like in fine arts, like musical theater, those kind of performances, because they report that on their annual report. We do have some individuals in the FOMD who do that type of work, hence we left it on. But for most people in our department, you probably wouldn't use it. Other publications and scholarly products and presentations and patents, I'll explain in a second. But what we're left with is other research activities. This is essentially a catch-all for anything that doesn't fit. So if you go all through these and you think, that what I'm trying to work on doesn't really fit, it's going to fit here. And we're going to talk about a definition of products of scholarship coming up, but that's where you'd put other products of scholarship. I just wanted it to change it from other research activities to other research/scholarly activities. Apparently that itself is a big undertaking because this section is hardwired. So something that I'd like them to tweak for next year, we couldn't get done this year. Here's how Mandela and I are conceptualizing things, and we want all the faculty to do it this way. Your peer-reviewed papers are going to go there under journal papers. Your published conference abstracts, you can put in other publication scholarly products. If you go to this section and look at the pull downs, you'll see other categories. If you're presenting at a conference, or for me, I would consider, some grand rounds, especially if it's more in the research domain, is going to go under these presentations. But if you're doing a conference presentation and it gets published, don't claim both of them. If they're in the same report cycle, you should really just claim, the higher of the two is generally the published conference abstract. So claim that one. And then other products of scholarship that don't fit these other categories will go in here. So in terms of talking about service, you can see the pull down here. I'm going to make a distinction about service administration to explain that job description page shortly, but you can see all the options here. So for me personally, all the work that I've been doing in terms of supporting our FAR transition, to me would be service to the faculty. Amanda and I had this discussion Wednesday night about, what happens when you're doing service to both two different things. So I believe I'm doing service to the faculty. Obviously, I'm also doing service to the department. You just claim whichever is the higher and you describe it all there. Obviously, if you're doing national work, you're going to do service to the profession if it doesn't fit as an actual product of scholarship. So I think it's fairly self-explanatory. Mentorship to colleagues is going to be here as well. In terms of administration, one of the differences that changes with Central University's approach to our job descriptions is that administration is only for those with named positions. So I'm an associate chair, that kind of work will go here. I am an assistant dean, I'll have a second one where I'll put in that. And what you can see is there's a first section for what's the basic position expectations. And if you have a good job description you got when you were put in that position, you can just copy and paste it in there. And then completion of the expected tasks. Usually you have a one over who's already going to give that information. So I actually know Daryl has already, I think, sent Narman kind of his assessment of me for the year in terms of my assistant dean. And so I will just make sure I put stuff in here in terms of what I did. If I went above and beyond, that would go in this main noteworthy accomplishment section. So again, part of what it is establishing what is part of the role and establishing what you did that was noteworthy. As opposed to service is the stuff we do that most of us do that's not related to a named position. And that's what's a little bit different in our faculty, especially those on the AIM-HSP. Basic scientists, my wife is a faculty member on main campus, and most are 40-40-20. 40% teaching, 40% research, 20% service. that's not tied to anything, that's showing up to committee meetings, your faculty councils, especially as you become an associate and full professor, doing things like FEC, sitting on national committees. That's just a given 20%. For us on the AMHSP, due to just the way things were structured with Alberta Health, we don't actually have protected time for service for many of our job descriptions, and we only get protected time if we have an admin position. Is it unfair? Yes, I will be the first to say that. But it is the current reality. But for someone like myself, who technically has 0% service, I'm still doing service stuff. I put it in there. I think Norman thinks I do a good job with these things. She advocates for me for that reason. So it is something that I think down the road with the AMHSP, we may want to address this disconnect, but it's not an easy thing due to a different lens of how government views the AMHSP. So I won't go down that rabbit hole today. I'm now going to get into some interesting things that's changed with our collective agreement. So in the newest collective agreement, this line was added that states the evaluation of academic faculty member whose duties include professional or clinical responsibilities shall explicitly take into account both the time required and assessment of quality. This didn't used to exist in our faculty agreement, where basically FEC and the institution didn't really care what we did on our clinical pillar. We just left that to more the Alberta Health side of things, AHS and our divisional clinical side. That changed with our newest collective agreement. This causes a bit of an odd issue because we somehow need an evaluation of this. However, good news is, like last year with MyLFMD, we have gotten away from all the bean counting of time for the clinical realm. We're not asking for that. But this is what I just did in the sandbox. I'm not asking you to write it this way, but I'm going to write this. I did all of my assigned weeks, or if in your case you did more than your assigned weeks, write that, of inpatient service, consults, outpatient clinics based on my AMHSP ISA. I feel, and this is me speaking, but you don't have to write it this way, I feel the quality of my care was on par with my colleagues. I certainly don't think I'm an amazing clinician, but I certainly think I'm doing an okay job. And I honestly do continue to reflect on these situations where I made errors, like delayed discharge or adverse events, and I discuss with my colleagues what I could do differently. This is an honest answer. Is it the greatest assessment of quality? No, but we really don't have any great metrics. So we're certainly not doing ALOS, ELOS comparisons every year. We just need something in this section. And ultimately, your divisional chief is going to actually raise a flag if there's a concern with your quality. That said, lower down, there is a section for highlights right there. So if you've done something where you've really advanced the clinical domain, that's an innovation that does not meet the definition of a product of scholarship, which will be forthcoming, you would write it in there. So that is something I do want to draw your attention to. Please make sure you fill in just something short. You did kind of what you were supposed to, and something around that. And a bit of reflective piece certainly doesn't hurt. All right. So I'm honest when we get to changes. I say the same thing about COMSI-based. I'm not the person who says COMSI-based medical education is the greatest thing. It's got some good, it's got some bad, it's got some ugly. Let's be honest about the annual report in the same way. But let's start with the good. First, don't shoot the messenger. Remember, I'm not the one totally driving this, although you can blame me partly because maybe I did make the motion to adopt FAR. But please don't shoot the messenger here. The good is, as I've said, we've gotten rid of the learners tab. Again, I get why our previous MedIT and our previous approach did add that. I totally understand why it was added. Okay. Sorry, I just saw the chat pop up, but I'll get to that later. I totally understand why we went with that approach last time. It helps with some reporting and things like that. But we've heard loud and clear it was a point of contention as people were filling out their annual report. And so that was removed. And now everything is just you scroll down the page and you fill things in. So that separate learner tab is gone. In my opinion, I do believe the FAR system is fairly streamlined as long as you follow it sequentially, clicking the next buttons, you skip fields that aren't important to you. It actually flows fairly nicely, in my opinion. The bad, I've got a question mark here for an intentional reason. So previously, MyFMD auto-imported from Grants 3.0 and MedSys, which was where the evaluations for the MD program existed. Seems like a good thing. Yes and no. What the problem was one, postgrad with 145 never uploaded. So I'd always have faculty going, I don't understand why my evaluations aren't there. Well, that's because those are your MD program evaluations, not 145. You have to manually enter those. What? And so in some ways, in my thought, it's probably better to have nothing upload or everything. Having this half upload actually makes things higher cognitive load. The thing with Grants 3.0, we saw so many problems at FEC. It was confusing. If you started a grant because you applied for it and it was in Grants 3.0, it's sometimes imported, and then the faculty didn't clean it up. It was honestly a hot mess at times, and even knowing when it was granted and things like that. So it was not perfect. And that's the problem with any import, is if it's more effort to revise what was imported, it actually can be worse. So that's why I have a question mark there. The auto upload of content is gone. We are not having grants uploaded. Again, people aren't usually getting 20 grants in a year. This shouldn't be that hard just to enter the information for the grant. So it's a bit of a change. You will need to do a little bit more entry. But here's where things get even more complicated. Our collective agreement actually had some of this language before that we kind of ignored, but it's actually been further espoused, if that's the best word. We always knew evaluation of teaching should be multifaceted. It shouldn't just be based on a number. We know there's flaws with numbers. We know teaching evaluations from students have some bias against certain demographic groups. We know all that. We know large classes where you're teaching 300 basic sciences is very different than me teaching on the wards. However, it's very interesting because I think this was even there in the previous collective agreement, but it's been further clarified that ASHUA, our union, and don't get me wrong, I think there's a good reason to have unions, but they've really pushed it that we're not supposed to even report any average scores. We're supposed to report the frequency table, i.e., how many students said strongly disagree, agree, yada, yada, yada. There's a problem because that data only exists on the actual PDF. Faculty relations and ASHUA have been in discussions because there's some issues around who should have access to your teaching evaluations. The chairs for sure should, and directors of programs should, but should FEC actually see the whole thing? We emailed faculty relations, I think a month ago. Dennis might be able to add in a bit more when we get to the Q&A portion, but we're still not sure on the final outcome. So that is the ugly. Hello, this is Future VJ coming to you with an update. We've now heard from faculty relations, and as of the middle of the summer, our recommendation to all of you using FAR is do not upload your teaching evaluations, and there won't be space to put in your teaching scores. So please do not report teaching scores or narratives from U of A students. If you'd like to add narratives or scores from non-U of A students, such as faculty development sessions or other sessions you may run, you are allowed to do that, and you can do that as part of your reflection. If you want to find more information on why this is and how to represent your teaching, please check out the FOMD FAR manual. Your department chair will continue to get teaching scores from med students and residents and other learners, and they will represent the quality of your teaching to FEC in their deliberations, but FEC will not be looking at the raw data. All right, that's all for now. Let's get back to the show. So that was 36 minutes in. I really just have a little bit more that I want to talk about. I'm going to discuss the terms scholarly and products of scholarship. So our faculty, I still feel right from the get-go, and Bruce, Mangela, and Maya have done a lot of this good work to really push for using Glassix criteria to have a definition of what is scholarly, and it's there, clear goals, adequate preparation, appropriate methods, significant results, effective presentation, reflective critique. Whether that's in the teaching domain, research domain, service domain, you can describe something as scholarly or not. Whereas a product of scholarship is something that is scholarly, and this is actually right out of our standards, that is peer-reviewed, has evidence of impact, and is publicly disseminated in a way others can use and build off of. So here's kind of a Venn diagram of there's teaching, there's good teaching, and how we measure that is kind of flawed because sometimes it's just about teaching scores. But there's scholarly teaching that actually adheres to Glassix, or at least most of it. And then there's products of scholarship. And I'm using this slide just to say this goes in the teaching section in the different subcategories. This you'll enter into other research activities. So I'll give you an example. You are running a course as a course coordinator, and as part of your job of running the course, you happen to write an MCQ question, you revise a few MCQ questions. You just do it because it's a need, sure, but you're not exactly researching the literature as to what MCQ questions are available. You're not getting the questions peer-reviewed. You're just running it. You run your exam because you run a course. That's teaching. That's good teaching if it's a good MCQ and you get some item stats on it. As opposed to if you actually are developing MCQs, especially at a national level, MCC, Royal College, CFPC, they're peer-reviewed by a bunch of peers. This is what I do as an exam board chair. They're peer-reviewed by a bunch of people, and they're disseminated, not widely, but within the Royal College's exam board repository for other boards to use, because we actually do have some questions, especially related to the opioid epidemic, that we're looking at sharing across boards, or at least it's disseminated so future board members can use. That can be a product of scholarship if it meets those definitions, especially if it has evidence of impact, like there's good psychometrics of your question, discriminates well. So that's just the divide between those two things. A podcast, for example, do you do random podcasts? You throw it up there. That could be teaching. It might reach the right audience. Versus if you actually have this, you develop it, you have colleagues peer review it before you actually publish the podcast. You've got some measure of uptake. Obviously, you're not going to get teaching evaluations, but you can actually do some follow-ups in terms of like people are actually using the podcast. It's making differences. My podcast has been, this is not true. I'm just using an example that someone gave me, that someone's podcast is being used as part of the curriculum in a medical school in India. That's amazing. That's a product of scholarship. All right, last slide, and we'll have lots of times for questions and answers. So what's the purpose? And Norman already alluded to this at the beginning. Yes, I understand it can feel like a headache. This is not a quick thing. I told my kids I'm presenting on something that honestly takes me a whole day to do. And I know that sounds insane to take a whole day, but that's because I really do take the time to go through it, think about where I'm at. And there is this important time to pause and reflect on an annual basis, three-year review as an assistant professor at the promotion steps to associate and full, to think about what you're doing. And especially at U of A, where we have merit, which is a separate discussion, this is your time to sell yourself. So, as I said, you need to be a bit of a salesperson. And I know the people in my division who don't sell themselves. Please do come to me. Like, we need you to. We want you to advocate for yourself. What? This will sound silly, but what I do is I go through the fields, I fill it in, and then I literally click through my calendar week by week. It only takes me 10 minutes. And I got my wife to do this with her last annual report, and she then realized, oh, right, I did that big thing last August. I forgot to put that in. If you just click through your calendar to see what you're doing, you might catch on big things. Because we sometimes see this at FEC where the chair says, hey, they did this. It's not in their annual report. We can't adjudicate it just based on your chair stating you did it. It has to be in the annual report. How well Again, don't belabor the issue for things that are just standard stuff. I taught a lecture, whatever. But if you actually did something that is truly scholarly, use that description box to describe how it was scholarly. It's more important for those who are on a clinician teacher, clinician educator track, but it's still important if you're doing that. If you're doing service, you can do scholarly service. Describe it. And that's the biggest thing. As I met with Mangela 2 evenings ago, we were kind of saying, like, this is the thing that we're like, you said you did something, but we have no clue what it is. We don't understand it. We don't know how scholarly it was. And the last thing, and it's sort of the same thing, is you have to describe it. It's one thing to just say I did something, right? We had one where an individual did great community engagement work, but they kind of shortchanged themselves by not fully explaining what it was. And once we had a better appreciation, it was like, wow, that was really amazing work. And although your divisional director will advocate in our department to Norman, and Norman will advocate to FEC, it needs to be in the report. The job of the chair is to just elucidate and kind of elaborate on the data that's there. It's not to advocate for something that is hard to understand. So that is my slide deck. I do just want to say, like, yes, there's growing pains. I got to be honest, I'm kind of looking forward to actually putting it all in because I think it's actually going to go fairly well. We do have super users from across the department. Maybe not every division has one, but between the super users, a short minute video just to get you started, and our FAR manual, we're pretty confident it's going to answer like 95+% of all your questions. But if you do have questions, you'll contact your super user. And if they have questions, they'll come to me and Mangela. So thank you for your time, and I'll open it up for questions.
Thanks, Vijay. That was fantastic. I'm going to go through the Q&As in a second, but I just wanted to say a couple of things. First of all, ORCID IDs. So there's two pieces to that. Number one is that not only does it accurately reflect, sort of what you've produced, but as a department, we actually use it for reporting. Yes, we can manually look up your names, but it's not accurate. And so please, and I'm going to be asking you when you come to meet with me as well, do you have your ORCID ID? Is it recorded? Because then Eleni and her group uses it for our annual reporting. And it just much more accurately reflects what it is that our department is doing overall. The second thing that I just wanted to say is Vijay mentioned that, you can fill in just a couple of things that are mandatory fill-ins and then submit it. But just keep in mind that this report is going to be looked at by FEC. And so, I can say it until I'm blue in the face that I know this individual did X, Y, and Z because I know all the good work you all do. But if it's not in the annual report, it doesn't count. And so please, ideally, get it filled in before you see me. But if there's pieces that are missing or something, that I hear you tell me I don't see, I can cue you and say, hey, you know what, just add this in. And Dennis or Vijay can talk about whether or not we're going to be able to open up the annual reports after September 30th, but that would be good to know as well. So I am going to open it up. First of all, Dennis, do you have any additional comments based on what's been said so far?
Yeah, so a couple of things. With respect to the September 30th, so contrary to what happened with my OFMD, where you had to submit it, FAR closes at the end of September 30th. So if you want to submit something, you do have to go back to your department chair or designate to get it opened. And you're not going to be hounded by me this time to complete your annual report. After a certain point, it will be locked and will not be reopened. And that's what FEC will see. So if you have a blank, annual report, well, you can expect that you're going to get a 0. Or if it's totally incomplete, you can expect that you'll get less than what you should have. And then you'll have to go through the process of appealing it, reconsideration, etc. So please submit your annual report by the deadline, end of September 30th. It just saves a whole lot of trouble for everyone.
And I'll add that, like, my wife's annual report's due August 15th. Most of main campus, their annual reports are due a lot earlier. And FEC was actually asked to move it earlier, and they appropriately advocated not to, because we're transitioning to a new system. So I think September 30th is a very, very reasonable deadline.
Thanks, Vijay. Thanks, Dennis. I'm just going to go through some questions. I'm going to park the admin piece until the end. I think Quentin asked about teaching material development, where it goes, but I think you've pretty much answered that. Do you want to add anything, Vijay?
Yeah. They're literally under general teaching. There's an educational material development section. If you get it to the point that it's a product of scholarship, peer review disseminated with evidence of impact, you'd put it actually under other research activities. But if it's not yet there, you'd put it under education material development under general teaching.
Rob just has a question about Rob Polly, teaching scholarship. Where does one put being a reviewer of Royal College questions, i.e. not writing the questions, but reviewing them? Would you put that as scholarship or scholarly activity or product of scholarship?
I would generally peer review. I don't know if Mangela is here, but generally peer review is service. Like when you peer review for journals, even though it's in the research domain, it's generally under service. So I would say peer review of teaching, whether it's of a product, I would put under service, and I would call that a service to the profession if it's at the national level.
That makes sense. And Dennis just confirmed, but yes, I do think AMHSP clinical faculty will also be using FAR.
Yes, all AMHSP members must do an annual report, and it'll be FAR this year.
Okay. Can data for 23-24 be added before September 30th? So can we do it throughout the year? You know how we used to be able to do with my FOMD? Can we, will the 23-24 FAR be open so that we can just continue adding?
No, not at this point. We're still working on this year's FAR. In the future, yes, the idea is that it will be open for the next year, so you can add it prospectively, but for this year, no.
Okay. So this situation around having more than one ORCID ID, I know I've come across this with another faculty member, and they basically had to unify it. If you reach out to Eleni, she'll be able to help you in terms of how to unify it, because I know this has been an issue for a few, at least one or two individuals that I know of, where they've somehow managed to get two ORCID IDs. But I believe FAR will probably only allow you to enter one, right? I would think. Yeah, you're muted, but yeah, I'm assuming so. Okay. And if it will close by September 30th and be hard to reopen, will most of the options for annual review meetings be available before September 30th? Now, that's a question for me, isn't it? I will do my very, very best. And it's a mixed blessing in the sense that I find there are some times when people just don't have it completed, which makes it very challenging. And I do like you to meet your division directors prior to meeting with me. So for anyone who requests before September 30th, absolutely, we'll make sure that we get you into the chair's office before September 30th.
And I can answer Rebecca's question. Yeah, so that's the FOMD FAR manual. We are 90% done the FAR manual. Mangela and I are meeting again next week to finalize it. And so it literally will go through every section on the report and say what goes there. And then at the bottom, I have an appendix for how to download your teaching evals. And I have an appendix of frequently asked questions like, where would I put this? Where would I put this? And we'll keep building that. It's just going to be a Google doc that we'll keep adding to as we get questions from super users so that it's kept up to date.
Perfect. Thanks.
I do also want to just apologize. Peter Sr. appropriately called me out on a thing I said. Thank you, Peter. I'm always open to reflecting what I said. I think I said it's not going to be that hard, and that's an unfair statement to say. You are right, Peter. What I would say is I believe this won't be as hard as our previous one based on the user interface. But thank you for correcting me. I take that.
Juan brings up a really excellent point, which is about publications that have been accepted but not published yet, or online and not in written format, or I guess hard copy.
Yeah, I can answer.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's a great question. What we have decided is there's only one option. You know what? I'll actually screen share the actual system, but in the actual system, under research, there used to be, I'll do it just in this one. There used to be lots of options of submitted, accepted, in press, yada, yada. We asked the FAR team to just have one: published, e-published. And what FEC discussed and decided is essentially the first time it is available in its final form publicly for people to access, that is the date you should include it. And some people, or many people, don't choose to put it in their annual report until it's actually in paper print. But there are some journals that takes 3 years from EPUB to paper print. We want it just to be the first time it's there. Now, for some people in our faculty, they're going to have a massive set of publications then in this coming year because they've got all the ones they've been holding waiting, and that's fine. Take credit for it this year. But Dennis, that is what we decided, right? It's the first time it's available, that first EPUB. So not accepted. It has to actually be that I could go to PubMed and download it.
That it has a DOI. Yeah.
Correct, when it has a DOI, yeah.
Okay, and then Dennis, this is a question for you. When will the 23-24 open up, and is there plans to keep future FARs open for indefinitely for those academic years, or are we always going to have to wait until close to the time of entry?
No, so the date we're expecting is July 4th, barring any unforeseen issues with IST, but that's a target date. There will be an announcement the day when it is available so that people know that they can go in. The idea is that in the future that the FAR can be opened longer prospectively, but for this year, we're still working on this year's, making changes to it, and there will be further changes based on feedback on this version. So the 23-24 will be open certainly before the end of the year, but we don't know quite yet when it will be open.
But
yeah, I would rather not for that reason, so that we can adjust the system based on feedback. And so I would anticipate, honestly, last quarter, because we need to see how FEC interacts with FAR in January for them to give feedback of things that they might need to see. But Jackie has a question. I would say the question was around reporting preprints. I think what we decided is no, just when it's the actual officially published version. You'd agree, Dennis?
Yeah.
Right. So not preprints. Once you have a DOI and it's online, you can put it in.
And on that note, Delaney has a question that apparently ResearchGate creates DOIs. I would just stick to the correct, the traditional journal when it's submitted, and that DOI to that journal. Because I didn't know that ResearchGate does that, but thank you for pointing it out. So I would say no to that. It should be if you're publishing it in a journal, unless that's the end place it's living.
Yeah, I guess so. Preprints do have a DOI. And so, I mean, that's what I rely on is I just click on the DOI to look. So that's going to be a little bit of a challenge. So we'll have to work through that. I mean, personally, I would prefer if they're online or in a journal. That's when it gets identified. And most importantly, don't duplicate. It always fascinates me how FEC members go back and look at previous annual reports and say that was claimed last year. So just be very cautious of that because I don't do that always. Unless it's something triggers. But we do have members on FEC that will go back and look that it was claimed the year before. And Lenora's question, yeah, Lenora, if it has been peer reviewed, then it is considered a product of scholarship by definition, right? So the preprints that I think Jacqueline was referring to are papers that are expected to be published, but I might be mistaken on that. So let me know. But if it's been peer reviewed, by definition, it's a product of scholarship.
I think the only your previous statement though, Norman, is you can't claim things twice. It's just cleaner to not ever claim preprints if they're going to be available. If, however, you are putting something in a sort of non-traditional repository, but it still meets the definition of scholarship, I guess you could claim it, but FEC will look at that as a lower quality. Because what we don't want you to do is submit something like that got a preprint in April and have it on that annual report and then submit it again the following year. So I personally don't do it until it's actually in the journal.
Yeah. And you know what we'll do is we'll just go through it this year and then give some guidance. And it might be worthwhile for us to just do a half pager. So I'll put out a little guidance for our faculty members in the next week or so.
Well, this all should really be in the
FOMD manual.
Manual. So
Perfect.
We're going to ask the question that this is great. The question preprints obviously needs to be in there.
Yeah, perfect. Just really quick. I know it's 9:00. Vijay, what would you say? You said a day to schedule to get your annual report done.
So if you ever come to my time management workshop, you always allocate more time than you actually need. So that if you actually finish early, you have the blessing of time. So I do block off a full day and I usually get it done in a half day, but block off the full day.
And then the final question I know everyone is wondering about is admin support. So I have Rayanne in the room and I can confirm that our DPS staff are being trained. They're going to all the sessions and so on. They can't enter everything for you. But if you're organized and have pieces that you would like them to enter, that's, just a matter of manual, they're happy to do that. I would suggest, Rayanne, getting in touch with you and just working with Rayanne and the group and seeing what kind of support can be provided.
Because the DAS as well, Norman, are also getting trained.
Right.
So they could go to the DAS as well.
So the only question Peter had was about delegation. We'll have to, because it has to be their CCID. Yeah. So Rayanne will provide you with that information in order to delegate the right individuals. So just on behalf of the department, I know how much work has gone into this from Vijay and the Big F faculty. And so I really sincerely want to thank you all. And we know this will be a work in progress for this year, but we'll give you as much guidance and support as we possibly can. And then, we'll just take it as it comes. So have a wonderful summer, everybody. And we'll see some of you tonight at our department dinner. So thanks.